Quick to talk. Fuck with it with y'all, man. All right, man. I'm on fire. All right, so look, man. Today's episode, we're gonna be talking about the lost message of the Super Bowl, through Kendrick Lamar, and I think that this is a very, 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 very important episode because I think a lot of people don't understand the messaging behind a lot of this, and I have a lot to say about this. Before I get into that, you know I got to get a spill. This is Torture Talk. If you like the content, please consider subscribing. If you're new here, let me work for your subscription today. All the beautiful, single, sexy ladies, put one in the chat. All the fellas, y'all know the final ones that just don't harass them. I don't sell no merch, but I do have content absolutely free. But if you want to leave a donation, link is in the description. Cash App, no more PayPal. They call me the Hidden Gem. I went from 13 subscribers to over 13, 14, 15, 16,000. And yes, I am the King of the North. Let me know what kingdom you from. All right, so look, man, this Sunday, there will be a battle rap event. You already know what it is. Me versus J Dab. So let's get it, man. All right, man. So look, this episode is very important, and it's going to be very educational for all of those who don't really know about certain things and where this stuff comes from. I learned a little bit too. So let's get it.
The halftime show was awful. What's going on? Why is this little black midget out here yelling and talking into a microphone? What's going on? The kids are...
I had to stop it. To me, it just seems like, and I know this, I'm just going to speak on this real quick before I even continue, because I'm going to start it over. But it just seems to me like whenever a successful black man that doesn't line up with your views politically, you always have something to say. And that goes on both sides. If there's a successful black Republican, they have an issue. If there's a successful black Democrat or leans more Democratic, they have an issue. No matter what black men do in this country, y'all always gonna have an issue. And y'all make it a business, a real big business on both sides to exploit black people, whether it's for your own personal gain or to destroy black men. This is exactly what y'all do on both sides. If you disagree with me politically, I could point out a bunch of Republican black men that are successful that everybody tear down. I could point out a bunch of black men that are Democrats that are successful or lean more towards Democrats that are successful, and y'all tear them down. This is what y'all do. So I'm not surprised to see people say this about Kendrick Lamar. I'm not surprised at all, because they do it. They always do it.
The halftime show was awful. What's going on? Why is this little black midget out here yelling and talking into a microphone? What's going on? The kids are... I know what he's
It was a word that was being said.
It was all a Trump rally for the halftime show.
On February 9th of 2025, Kendrick Lamar was set to make history as he became the first ever rapper to headline the Super Bowl halftime show by himself. There were a lot of expectations as to what Kendrick Lamar would be doing at the Super Bowl halftime show, whether it would be a victory lap on Drake, maybe he'd announce the release of a new record, or maybe, just maybe, Kendrick Lamar was gonna stand on the biggest stage of America and use his platform to make political commentary. And I think it's safe to say that we got a little bit of everything. We got the expansion of a new song, we got the Drake trolling, and we even got the political commentary. But as I looked at the Super Bowl performance and I looked at GNS to search for a deeper meaning, I realized,
man, that Super Bowl performance was fire. I'm sorry, I have to say it. That joint was fire. A lot of y'all just was hating, bro. A lot of y'all was hating because y'all seen a black man, a whole field of black people, bro. Y'all was hating. That joint was fire. For you to say it's awful, then you ain't really trying to understand black culture. You know what I'm saying? You could say, well, it was awful, but do you understand what they were saying? Do you understand what they meant? Again, we have to endure or dealt with all of these bands that played from back in the day that we didn't understand what they was talking about and what they were doing. We didn't understand it. And you can't say, well, the halftime show is for white people, because if it's a part of America and we are considered a part of America, you have to understand that maybe we didn't like some of these things that y'all was talking about, but we had to deal with it. We had to deal with all those bands that played. We had to deal with it. The halftime show was awful. Y'all made a whole segment about the halftime show just so you can point it out that it was awful. It's disgusting, man. But let's keep it going.
Realized that Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl halftime performance was, in many ways, the reincarnation of hip-hop. And to understand why I'm saying that, perhaps we need to take a deeper dive into this line right here. On the surface level, you might theorize that the revolution is referring to Kendrick Lamar talking about an actual revolution being televised, perhaps in the next following years, or perhaps calling his halftime show performance a revolution in hip-hop, or whatever it may be, a revolution in and of itself. But I think that to truly understand what Kendrick Lamar meant by the revolution will be televised, we need to take a deeper dive into the history of what this phrase even means.
Gil Scott-Heron, exactly who that is. Let's go.
Let me make it as clear as possible. Every rapper you've ever heard of, especially the ones that are politically driven, are in some way inspired by Gil Scott-Heron, whether they believe it or not. I mean, there is a reason why Gil Scott-Heron deserved to be called the godfather of rap. And to understand why he earned that nickname and how that connects to Kendrick Lamar and his Super Bowl performance, we need to take a deep dive into who Gil Scott-Heron was. Born in Chicago on April 1st of 1949, Gil Scott-Heron was the son of Bobby Scott, an opera singer, and Gil Heron, the first black footballer to play for Celtic FC. However, it was his mom's side of the family that Scott-Heron was closest with, and proved to be the most influential in his life. In his early childhood, not only was he breaking color barriers, he was also introducing himself to different types of culture. Whether it be through being one of the first kids to integrate in his middle school or listening to the sounds of a Puerto Rican neighborhood, Gil Scott-Heron was gaining perspective to things that most of the country was blind to. And at the peak of people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King making speeches and radicalizing the youth, Gil picked up an interest in writing. And it was his writing which would get the young writer a full-ride scholarship to attend high school at the Fieldston School, becoming one of 5.
I didn't know all that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that he picked up, he got a full scholarship off of his writing. I didn't know that. Revolution will be televised. Yeah. Yeah, this is deep. Let's go.
Black students to attend the school. And after he was done with that, Scott-Heron attended Lincoln University, where Gil Scott-Heron would meet Brian Jackson and create the band Black and Blues. And to understand the impact of Gil Scott-Heron and the Black and Blues, we have to understand the style of poetry that he had to understand how hip-hop became hip-hop. In the 1920s, spoken word poetry became popular. It was poetry that wasn't necessarily meant to be read on paper, but performed. In the most simplest way to say it, this is the most earliest version of what we know today as rap. However, what's most important about spoken word poetry is that it will influence this new type of poetry that we can call contemporary poetry or post-contemporary poetry, also known as new poetry. Because in the 1960s, the concept of poetry entered its postmodernism stage of life, where poets began using words that the audience could easily recognize to get the message through.
Looked at the point.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. I also believe that a lot of poets back then was different from a lot of artists. Because I think a lot of artists back then, it's certain things that they couldn't say on the radio, so they had to disguise it. So they had to become more clever with their writing because they couldn't say certain things on the radio. So they had to disguise it. And I think that this type of poetry was straightforward because they wasn't trying to get out on the radio. And this is why they had that whole thing where they had records, and some of these records they would say, oh, you can't listen to this record. It had that. It was like explicit content, but it was before the explicit content thing. But it was like they would ban records, like, oh, you can't hear this person or whatever. Like it was crazy.
Point said,
postmodernism stage of life, where poets began using words that the audience could easily recognize to get the message through.
Looked at the poem said, "What now outside the wall I see, a shadow of an image me." I said, "Well, God damn, let me read this again." What now outside the walls? In the back of the room, somebody said, "Hey, this must be deep." This must be deep means that, like, I recognize all of these words individually, but damn if I can get anything out of the order in which they currently appear. This must be deep. So the idea became not only to use ideas that were familiar to people in the community, but to use the language that everybody could understand.
And to me, one of the leaders in popularizing this style of poetry is none other than Gil Scott-Heron. But before we continue talking about Gil Scott-Heron, make sure to hit the subscribe button. I would do a poem right now, but I don't really have a script for these parts. I just ask people nicely to subscribe, and if they subscribe, they subscribe, and if they don't, then they don't. But I really would appreciate it if you subscribe. Not begging you to, not even saying you have to, but you know, it's there. Anyways, he was also doing spoken word poetry with instrumentation behind them. And not only that, his spoken word poetry was politically driven. Or in other words, if you made a checklist of what made hip-hop, Gil Scott-Heron would check every box. And even if you don't believe me and you don't know who Gil Scott-Heron is, perhaps the poem that has gone on to define the career and legacy of Gil Scott-Heron was that of "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." The title of the poem alone has gone on to outlive the life of Gil Scott-Heron and take a life of his own. But what does it mean? What is the revolution in this context, and how does that relate to Kendrick Lamar? Well, let me explain. Or actually, don't let me explain it. Here's Gil Scott-Heron explaining it.
Yeah, I had to cut that part out because for some reason it was scratchy and you can't really hear what he's saying. And I think that he probably cut that part out as well because of the probably copyrights. But yeah, I had to cut that part out.
But I've compiled what few facts I could, such as they are, to see if we could find out a little bit of something. And this is what I got so far. First, white folks discovered Africa. They claimed it fair and square. Cecil Rhodes couldn't have been robbing nobody because, hell, there wasn't nobody there.
In many ways, I believe that the revolution that Gil Scott...
He was a smooth dude, man. He was a smooth dude. I like Gil Scott. He was such a smooth dude. Just the way he talked. You could tell that he was a player. You could tell. But to me, the revolution will be televised. It's a very, very deep meaning. Very deep. Very, very deep. And it's to the point where it's like, it's emotional. You know what I'm saying? Revolution won't be televised. It's also emotional too. So this is around the Black Panther Party movement. Back then, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all of these people were icons in their own right, man. They did a lot for the elevation of the Black community and Black people in general. Like this guy is one of those guys. You know what I'm saying? He's one of those guys. It's a lot of them. Some people that people don't agree with. I take it all in totality. I take everybody from Gil Scott-Heron to Thomas Sowell, down to Malcolm X, down to Martin Luther King, you know, down to every Black man, even the ones we did disagree with. They bring something to the table because that's what it's about. When you at your family table eating, everybody ain't going to always agree. You know what I mean? You got people in your family that totally disagree with you. This is why I bring everybody to the table. I love when I see black people, Black excellence. I love it. I love it.
Scott-Heron was talking about was not just the radicalizing of young black folks, but it was the prophecy that was hip-hop. Hip-hop has been what has radicalized many of the youth into what they are today in terms of their politics and how they go about it. And more importantly, hip-hop just educates everybody, encouraging the youth to do their research on Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and all these. Now, you might be asking, why does this all matter? Have I been duped into watching a Gil Scott-Heron video? I'm here for Kendrick Lamar. Well, here's the thing. When I looked up Gil Scott-Heron's style poetically, I found a lot of people saying that he was an aggressive, no-nonsense political mastermind. Someone who would educate the listener with a powerful message every time he went up on stage to recite a poem. And it almost reminded me of this aggressive rapper that has these political ideas and this message to him. And it made me realize that the reincarnation of Kendrick Lamar, poetically at the very least, is not most similar to Tupac or whoever it may be that you were trying to think of. It was always Gil Scott-Heron. I mean, think about it. Arguably speaking, Kendrick Lamar's most impactful body of work was To Pimp a Butterfly, a album where he did a lot of poems over jazz beats, with one of the main theses of that album and that record being the political movement of America in that day and age. The career of Gil Scott-Heron, on the other hand, is full of poetry over jazz instrumental or just instrumentation, with a heavy political lean that talked about the politics of that day and age. Furthermore, the more I looked into Gil Scott-Heron's life and the career of Kendrick Lamar, the more spooked out I became. Because Gil Scott-Heron died on May of 2011. Just 2 months later, Kendrick Lamar would release his debut record, Section 80. And as I thought about the connection between Kendrick Lamar and Gil Scott-Heron, I realized that Kendrick Lamar ending off the set with Turn the TV Off was more than just his victory lap over Drake. It was him once again paying tribute to Gil Scott-Heron and the revolution that won't be televised because Kendrick Lamar made sure to turn the TV off.
Turn this TV off, turn this...
Anyways, I know this took a while, but I really wanted to pay respect.
That was pretty decent. I like that. That was pretty decent. Pretty decent. Yeah, some people say that Gil Scott-Heron is the godfather of rap, and he created that aggressive poetry of, I definitely would put Kendrick Lamar in that category of where Gil Scott-Heron is. You know what I'm saying? I think a lot of people got to understand poetry started all. I don't necessarily like poetry too much. I'm not a big poetry person. But poetry did start it all. And I think that poetry to becoming a rhythmic pattern over instrumentals is a creation that not like no other. You know what I'm saying? I just don't think that there's ever been a creation of music like that. And it's so crazy that it's ours and it's still, people can try it, but we do it the best. It's never going to be manipulated to the point where you might have somebody that do it better. Now, it might be there might be one that can do it really well, but when you add the culture into it and certain things that only can be said by us because we're the only ones that can understand it, then yeah, that all that's out the window. People can rap fast, rap slow, but sometimes it's not about that. Sometimes it's not about what you say or how you say it. You know what I'm saying? It's about what you say and how you say it. If that makes sense. Because we can understand it. It's like decoding something. Our voice can only decode it, or our voice is the only voice that would be understood. It's kind of like different languages in Africa. You know what I'm saying? Just one of those things, man. But yeah, it's I love it, man. I love it all. I love it all. I love it all. You know what I'm saying? Thank y'all for joining me. I appreciate y'all. I know that was a pretty short episode. We usually have long ones, but yeah, man. All right, man. Y'all have a good one. A good one. Actually, it's not that short. It's pretty. It's not long, but it's long. Pause. You know what I'm saying? All right, man. See y'all. Peace. Bye.